We've seen Moscow, and we've seen the nerdy place the Napoleonic buffs will go to to get away from the crowds at Borodino. The other place, naturally, you think of when you think of Russia, you think of Moscow, and you think of St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
Is there something? What do we do in St. Petersburg, Jimmy?
There's actually quite a bit of stuff you can do in St. Petersburg. Which is obviously the imperial capital of Russia. So there's a lot of stuff associated with Imperial Russia there. And obviously one of the major sites of St. Petersburg is the Winter Palace, or the Hermitage. Like the two used to mean separate things, and technically they still do, but they're essentially mean the same thing now. But what we're talking about is the Winter Palace itself, like the main sort of palatial halls, rather than the museum part, where there are hundreds and thousands of exhibits where you can spend like half a year going around and seeing everything. And there are going to be some Napoleonic things there, but our main focus is going to be on the Winter Palace itself and on the ceremonial halls and spaces within. And we start with the Field Marshal's Hall, because that's one of the earliest halls you're going to visit when you climb up the main Jordan staircase. And what you will see in the Field Marshal's Hall is portraits of 7 field marshals from Russian history, 3 of them from the late 18th century and 4 from the Napoleonic Wars and a bit further. So the 3 earlier ones are Potemkin, Rumyantsev, and Suvorov, who saw a lot of action fighting against the Turks, and are regarded as some of Russia's greatest military commanders under Catherine the Great. And obviously Suvorov is quite well known for his Italian campaign and also his crossing of the Alps. And the other 4 field marshals we have are Kutuzov, Wittgenstein, Diebitsch, and Paskevich. If you've been listening to us, and especially me, a lot, you may wonder why is Barclay de Tolly not there? And the reason Barclay de Tolly is not there is frankly because, as a quote-unquote German, despite the fact that both Diebitsch and Wittgenstein had German names, Barclay was still not quite considered, should I say, patriotic enough.
Yeah,
to
stand alongside these other
field marshals. Yeah, so it's a bit of a shame. Unfortunately, it took some time for Barclay's reputation to slowly be restored, and it's not really until quite recently when Barclay has actually been placed on the same footing as Kutuzov, if not just slightly lower, because Kutuzov is Kutuzov. So you've got Field Marshal's Hall, and then a few rooms over. After you get into the Armorial Hall, which is, I believe, the largest hall in the palace, you will get into a rather small, narrow corridor, really, which is the military gallery of 1812. And even though it's called the Gallery of 1812, it actually does commemorate also the other campaigns of 1813 and 14, and also 1815, where the Russians marched a hell of a long way and didn't have much to do because old Arthur Wellesley managed to
beat them to it.
Yeah.
The right place at the right time.
Indeed. So the 1812 gallery is a mecca for enthusiasts of the Napoleonic Wars, and especially of the Russian army.
If you've been watching the series so far and you've seen any portrait of a Russian general, chances are it's come from that gallery.
Yeah, indeed. Because the most famous representations are generally from there. And so what you see in the gallery is more than 300 portraits of Russian generals who fought in these campaigns. And there are, of those 300, there are most of them, the vast majority, are bust length. And they're essentially sort of arranged like tiled across the walls. The ones which aren't, there are 7 of them, of which 3 are equestrian portraits featuring Tsar Alexander I at the very end, underneath a canopy, and then to his side we have his allies, King Frederick Wilhelm III of Prussia and Emperor Francis I of Austria. And these were paintings which are actually added later, as far as I'm aware. Most of the paintings in the gallery were painted by an Englishman, George Dorr, and a couple of assistants. Just a bit of background on George Dorr. Actually, he came to Tsar Alexander's attention in 1818 when he accompanied the Duke and Duchess of Kent to St Petersburg, and which is where Alexander thought, you seem like a decent enough artist, and I have this great plan for for this gallery of Russian generals. Why don't you join me? And those of you who know your British history would know that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are the parents of Queen Victoria, christened Alexandrina Victoria after her godfather Tsar Alexander I. You see, it's all connected.
It's all ties up, all tied up in this gallery of 300 portraits.
Yeah, over 300.
Over 300 portraits. Some of whom, if I'm not mistaken, are dead.
You mean so yes.
Some of the cities are technically dead.
Yeah, yes. So by that point, actually, quite a lot of them would have been dead. And what they tended to do, if they couldn't paint from life, is they would use any other sort of images, portraits, engravings, whatever they could find. And unfortunately, I think there are around about a dozen of whom they couldn't find a likeness for generals who passed away, and therefore the only thing they could do is include their name on a golden frame, but leave the space blank. So you have a green velvet sort of background where their portrait would have been otherwise.
Nice gesture.
Yeah, and just to carry on from those 3 equestrian portraits, you also have 4 full-length portraits, which are by the doors, and they feature some of the most significant figures in the Russian army, including Kutuzov and Barclay de Tolly, the 2 field marshals. And you also have Grand Duke Constantine, who is not a marshal, but is a member of the imperial family, and therefore deserves his full-length portrait. And the other member of the quartet is perhaps the most surprising, which is, we've already mentioned him a little earlier, Sir Arthur Wellesley, the 1st Duke of Wellington. And why on earth would the Duke of Wellington find himself there? It's because, well, one thing, it's because you've got Alexander, and then you've got the Prussian and Austrian monarchs.
Yeah.
And Britain was also a key member of the 6th Coalition and indeed the 7th Coalition. And therefore, as a result of the victory at Waterloo, the Duke of Wellington was given a Russian Field Marshal's baton, one of 8 Field Marshal's batons, I believe, that he has.
Yeah, you can see them in Apsley House.
Yeah. And therefore they decided, as a gesture to the British, and because he was technically a Russian field marshal, he could have his portrait on there.
At that time, Wellington was actually one of the last Russian field marshals in service. Actually,
alive.
Yeah, when he was alive, he was one of maybe one of 2 left,
yes,
or something like that.
Yeah. And that's because they had to, I think it was Wittgenstein, they appointed him a field marshal either just before Wellington visited, I think. I mean, there was a joke going around that otherwise Wellington would technically have been the commander-in-chief. But in any case,
It's there.
let us go on from the
red coat and all, but there, let's move on.
Let us go on from the military gallery, and now, if you're in the military gallery, you would be drawn to going to the St George's Hall, which is the throne room, and that is obviously a very imposing and important room to visit. But if you carry on along the corridor, the axis of the corridor, you will soon find yourself in the Alexander Hall, named after, obviously, Alexander I. Now, this was built in 1839 following a terrible fire suffered by the Winter Palace. And actually, thankfully, the portraits in the 1812 gallery were all evacuated, but the gallery itself had to be rebuilt. But after the fire, the Alexander Hall was built in a Gothic style, or sort of Gothic classical style. I mean, it's a quite interesting combination, and it features sort of up on the walls. It has light blue walls, and it features these medallions, 24 white on blue medallions by Fyodor Tolstoy, commemorating the campaigns of 1812 to 1815. And the hall also displays George Dawes' iconic portrait of Alexander I, who's standing and holding his bicorn hat. And I believe it used to show battle scenes from the 1813 and 1814 campaigns, but they're no longer there, and it now shows exhibits, I guess, I think silverware from the 18th century or 18th and 19th centuries, something like that. So we now have to leave the Winter Palace, although you can spend like a whole day in the whole complex, and we well we move outside to the Alexander Column, which is slap bang in the middle of Palace Square. Now, this was designed by the French architect Auguste Montferrand and installed in the middle of Palace Square in 1834 to commemorate Alexander's victory over Napoleon. And it's topped with the statue of the Archangel Michael, and it's said that the face of the angel is based on that of Tsar Alexander himself. And I am willing to believe this because during his lifetime, Alexander was always described as having an angelic face. So
yeah, there's I suppose you could say something in it that would lend itself to classical representations of cherubim-like people. He also had a fairly deep belief that he had been sort of chosen by God as he went on in life.
Yeah, I mean, he became quite spiritual in the second half of his reign, which we I think talked about a little. Yeah, you're not going to miss the Alexander Column. It's absolutely massive. It's in the middle of Palace Square. I mean, you're going to see it before you go to the Winter Palace. So you may as well have a look. Then.
And speaking of things that are difficult to miss,
well,
not as tall and not as obvious, but nevertheless big.
but very, very big and wide is the Kazan Cathedral, which is on Nevsky Prospect, the main thoroughfare of the city of St. Petersburg, which leads from the Admiralty at one end to the Alexander Nevsky Lavra on the other end, which you will notice by its colonnade, which may remind you of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and the colonnade which is in front of St. Peter's Square. And while this is not a completely sort of circular colonnade, it's a sort of semicircular colonnade, which is which faces onto Nevsky Prospect. And it's quite interesting because if you go inside the cathedral from Nevsky Prospect, what you'll see is you are actually entering in through the side, and the altar is to your left, due to the way that the altar has to face in a certain direction. But in order to build the cathedral, where it's sort of where the colonnade meets the avenue, that's the compromise they had to make. And inside the cathedral, what you will see is the grave of Field Marshal Kutuzov, and around the grave you will have the standards, French eagle, and a couple of standards captured by the Russians, as well as several keys to various German and Polish fortresses which capitulated to Kutuzov's army as the Russians and Prussians crossed into Central Europe. So that's the interior. And the exterior, you have the monuments of Barclay de Tolly and Kutuzov outside, and they were they're designed by the sculptor Boris Orlovsky and unveiled in 1837, the 25th anniversary of 1812. And what you'll see is, so Barclay, if you're looking at the cathedral, Barclay is on the right-hand side, and he's holding his Field Marshal's baton, perhaps ready to give some sort of order. And with Kutuzov, with his statue on the left-hand side, you have him with his right hand. No, I believe it's his left hand pointing and his right hand sort of holding a sword near his waist, and both sort of very dramatic poses. And Kutuzov sort of also left hand outstretched with his field marshal's baton, as if giving an order.
A little like the Door's portrait of him, that is pointing off somewhere.
Sort of, yes, sort of. But the door portrait is pointing with his right hand, and this one he's pointing with his left hand. But in any case, you don't want to miss those when you visit the Kazan Cathedral. And not too far along the road on the other side is the Church of St Catherine, and this is a Catholic church. Sort of, I believe it's the only Catholic basilica in Russia, or certainly in St Petersburg. And the point of interest for fans of the Napoleonic era here, and indeed fans of the French Revolution era, is that this is where, in 1813, General Jean-Victor Marie Moreau, the French Revolutionary general who later was disillusioned by Napoleon's increased power, and exiled himself to the United States, and later returned to serve as a military advisor to Tsar Alexander. Unfortunately, after a few days, he was killed by a cannonball at the Battle of Dresden, and therefore his body was taken back to St Petersburg and buried in the Catholic cathedral there. And if you go, you can still see his memorial stone, his tombstone.
That's quite a circle there, isn't it?
Yes, and I feel like his his fate was very tragic. To spend sort of a decade in exile in America, living a pretty nice life, and then to go back to Europe, and then within literally a few days to be mortally wounded and killed in battle. And actually, a few years later, he was at the Bourbon Restoration. He was posthumously elevated to the rank of Marshal.
So he could have been in. He could have been on a portrait wall somewhere as well.
Essentially, although he was a French Marshal rather than a Russian Marshal. In any case, so that's the Church of St Catherine, and a couple of other places associated with the Napoleonic Wars is the Peter and Paul Fortress, which is one of the main sites of St Petersburg. It's where it's one of the first buildings to be built in the city, and it's the burial place of the Romanov Tsars, including Alexander I. Although there is dispute over whether Alexander is actually there, or whether whoever is there is Alexander. But
that's a different thing altogether. Interestingly enough, there was a funeral service held in the Kazan Cathedral for him.
Apart from the Peter and Paul Cathedral, where the Tsars are buried, you're also going to see the State Museum of St. Petersburg, which is the St. Petersburg's history, and there is some stuff associated with the Napoleonic era, including some statues of Barclay de Tolly and Kutuzov, models of those outside Kazan Cathedral. And there's also an interesting it's probably a print or a lithograph or something, which shows the studio of George Daw as he's working on all these portraits for the 1812 gallery. And you see, a ton of portraits of various generals just stacked up against the wall. And the interesting thing about this lithograph is it shows Alexander in person, sort of ready to be painted, and the exact pose of his iconic portrait by Daw.
Yeah,
so
just a really nice touch.
Yeah. And and also the site is associated with the Decembrists, because this is where the Decembrists heard their sentences, because as this used to be the commandant's house of St Petersburg, so this is basically where they'd be brought after the trial, and they were just imprisoned in the fortress, so it was quite easy. It was quite what's the word? It was quite a convenient place for them to hear their sentences, and there's a memorial to that in the museum now. So we now head a little far from the city centre to the south, near the Obvodny Canal. And actually, if you wanted to walk, like, it's maybe, I don't know, 45 minutes or an hour direct from the Admiralty right down to Gorhovskaya Street, and then eventually, after you get to the end of the street, you walk a bit further, you will get to Bugaration Square, which is where the statue of Prince Bagration stands, and it's quite a nice statue of him, sort of wearing his military overcoat, and I thought it was quite striking that when I took a photo of it when I visited in 2017, there was quite a bit of backlight when I tried taking a photo, but so I just decided to make the sun essentially sort of be a halo around his head, which is I think the sort of tribute that he deserves. And actually, just an aside from the about Pigration, in the Museum of the Artillery, which is just behind the Peter and Paul Fortress, you have you obviously have a lot of exhibits about the Russian artillery, which include some stuff on 1812, but you also have two absolutely massive statues of Kutuzov and Bagration, which basically take the whole height of the space. So that's very imposing, and once again a sign that Kutuzov and Bagration were certainly the two top guys during the Soviet era.
Yeah.
And indeed before, but certainly during the Soviet era, and only now Barclay is having his comeback. In any case, now we have we've basically set out the main sites associated with the Napoleonic Wars in St Petersburg. So we now go a little outside St Petersburg. There are several palaces outside St Petersburg, which are very famous and very worth seeing, including the Catherine Palace and Peterhof. But the palace we'd like to talk about is Gachena, because it's the one which is most associated with the Napoleonic Wars. And it was built initially for Count Orlov, but later passed on to Tsar Paul, and it has a massive parade ground in front of it. And if there's anything that Tsar Paul enjoyed, it was a massive parade. And therefore, Tsar Paul brought his sons up, Alexander, Constantine, and the others, to very much in a sort of military lifestyle and to enjoy watching parades. So that's how Alexander and Constantine came to be, and indeed Nicholas after them. And therefore, you had a lot of military parades during the reign of Alexander, which are held in Gachena. And while you're not going to see, unless you have a reenactment or something, you're not going to see any Russian soldiers marching about. Mm-hmm. It's still interesting to envisage them there. And to be honest, while Gachena itself, like the exterior, is perhaps one of the ugliest Russian palaces out there, even compared to nobles' palaces. The interior is actually worth visiting. There's still restoration work being done, so new rooms are being opened, and as I understand, you can actually climb up to one of the towers to get a nice panoramic view of things. So that is Gachena. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be visiting the Catherine Palace or the or Peterhof, which is also worth visiting. And best way to get there is probably by bus, which may be troublesome. But if you're well prepared, you should be fine. But obviously, it would be nice to have a Russian speaker around to help you. And I mean, this is the thing with Moscow and St. Petersburg. If you're within the cities, you're going to be absolutely fine, and you'll be able to get around fairly well with a metro. But if you ever venture outside, that's when the English ability of the Russians who are there is significantly lower, and you would be well advised to pick up some Russian.
Yeah. If you're not going with a tour out to the Catherine Palaces and things and can arrange to split off somewhere, then
Indeed. But I mean, but there's the thing, like Gachena is completely separate from all these palaces are separate from each other. So essentially, you're going to have to take like 3-4 day tours, which depending on, there are also a lot of other things to see in St. Petersburg, including like the Fabergé Museum, which also includes a few things related to the Napoleonic era. So it's not for me to suggest that visitors to St. Petersburg or to Moscow should just see everything Napoleonic and not see anything else.
We will invite anybody who has a specific question about traveling in Russia that they would like to pose to Jimmy here, not me, Jimmy, in the comments below, and we'll do our best to, he will do his best to answer them.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll let him know the comment is there, and then we'll work out how it can be answered.
I'm very happy to give any sort of travel advice to Russia, especially on a budget, although you probably don't want to be on a budget as low as mine, because you probably want to have a hot shower.
Not just wash in a stream somewhere.
Yeah. But
no. Or get locked out of museums and
yes, and this is another thing to warn about.
Yes, right, yeah.
Check and double check when museums are open, and especially the Sanitary Dien, or the cleaning day, when once every month you're maybe going to have like one extra day or two where somehow the place you're planning to visit is closed, try not to visit on that day,
Yeah.
as I know from experience.
And until the next time, we will see. So we'll see you in another video, basically.
Yes.
Thank you for watching so very much.